Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Soul Sessions, another fabulous episode with Rob and I. And we are going to talk today in our continuing series on Buddhism and that philosophy and how it can be applied in our modern life and every day. You don't have to become a Buddhist to practice the philosophy. And today's topic is the matrix of Buddhism.
Yeah, it's definitely one of our favorite philosophies. A lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
And we've actually met, I think we mentioned that last time, we actually met when I was studying Buddhism, and then I invited you to the Sangha.
Yes.
And you participated for a while. So you got a good dose of it.
Yeah, for like a year, I think we were in that. Every week we went.
Yeah, it was a great experience. I wanted to start off by some of the really cool stuff about the philosophy.
Okay.
For me, one of the coolest ones is their care for animals. This idea that all sentient beings are looking for happiness. They're very much like us. Regardless of what life form it is, you should treat it with respect because it's kind of very similar to you.
Well, personally, I was terrified of spiders, and I used to just squash them when I was younger. I was like, ah. And by studying Buddhism, I now, most of the time I ask you to get rid of them, but, kind of taking them and putting them outside. And I know it seems like such a small act, but for that small little creature, but it's very loving. And so it just shifts your perspective on caring for everything, not only just other human beings, but every living thing.
Yeah, it's one of the coolest aspects of Buddhist philosophy. You don't have to be a vegetarian or vegan to practice those things, because you can also be just compassionate and mindful of animal life
and the earth
and plants, of course, and all life forms.
And so let's talk about
What about you? What did you experience as some of the cool stuff?
Well, I love this. Wow, that's a great question. I love the idea that everyone, it's very similar to Jungian psychology, where you see everyone as you. In Jungian psychology, we talk about the projection of our shadow, and archetypes that we see in the world are really in us. And Buddhism talks about that. It probably prepared me for more of Jung's work. What I see in the world is also connected to me. And so that I find, even when there's trouble in the world and there's darkness in the world and then there's good things that happen, that I'm connected to both. And instead of they're bad and I'm good, or I'm bad and they're good, it's everything is us. And that matrix of that makes up the world is we're all connected to that in a way. And so the wisdom in others is my wisdom reflected back.
Yeah, that's very cool. But just to emphasize, we approach the study of Buddhist philosophy as students of the mind, and as a philosophy, really we encourage people to question it. It's not like a religion where something is set and you can't question it. In philosophy, what we like about the approach is that no, it's the contrary. You're supposed to engage with it and question the precepts there.
Yeah.
Instead of just accepting it. And the Buddha himself was a great philosopher in that regards, in that he invites people not to believe anything he says just because he's saying it. He says, think about it, question it, try it out for yourself, see if it's a direct experience that you can have of it.
He also said, don't make any statues of me. and that is that kind of reverence, he's special in some way. And then you're not, you're separate. And that's, of course, no one listened. There's Buddha statues everywhere. But he really didn't want people to think that he was different than anyone else, that everyone has this opportunity to be enlightened and everyone can reach those states.
Yeah. One of my last favorite piece, or not my last one, but one of the favorites, or my favorites, is the Zen philosophy, or the Zen Buddhist culture that evolved out of Buddhism, which I think it really gets to the spirit of what Buddha was trying to do. Kind of purify our awareness to the extent that you're in the moment, you're having a direct experience of what's happening now in your body, in your mind, in your environment, without leaning on the gods and the heavens and the kind of all the metaphysics or the mythology of things. Very pure, very direct, kind of meditate, sit, breathe, think about what's going on here. And the Zen school, of course, just typifies that beautiful simplicity of things. Yeah. So let's get to some of the philosophical ideas that are still with us today. They influenced Western psychology big time through Schopenhauer, through Nietzsche, through Jung. Even Freud was influenced by some of these ideas that were floating around in Europe at that time. And one of them is this idea of the ego. What we call the self in Western psychology. Really, when we think about ourselves, when we say self-esteem,
self-realization is different, but
a little bit different.
But self-awareness is like, I'm aware of my patterns, my ego's patterns.
Yeah. So the Buddha said there is no self. There is no self.
That's such a hard concept for people.
Yeah, because it's almost like self-evident to us that we don't even question it most of the time.
Like the ego isn't real.
The ego isn't real, which means the self is not real. The way we talk about the self in Western culture.
The small self.
The small self.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is no you in essence, the way you think about it. And like you say, that's a hard concept for us to accept, because the senses kind of give us this idea that there is this me in my head peering out through the window of the eyes and looking at the world, right? So
that has a history, that has a body and has talents and skills and problems.
Yeah, and it feels very solid to us until we start to examine it, of course. Then it's nowhere to be found. So Buddha goes through these 5 aggregates that he says that are, if you think of an onion, you start to peel away these 5 layers of our being, and sure enough, there is no self to be found. It seems to arise from the collection of these 5 aggregates. So these 5 aggregates are, one is the body, and of course many of us identify with the body. In materialistic philosophy, the body is the self. Like people think, if I have a body,
my hand, my legs,
and
face.
Once I don't have a body, the game's up, right? It's over. There's nothing. Very nihilistic kind of philosophy where you disappear basically, and there's nothing to be had after that. But and there are some Buddhist atheists, in the sense that because Buddha didn't really incorporate the idea of the gods or a god into his philosophy, a lot of people think, well, he was an atheist. But if you look at his history and his way of teaching, it's more that he wanted to leave that out and focus on how can we get people to go beyond their suffering. And often he thought the mythology of the gods was a hindrance to them, because there was always this idea, well, once I die or once I go to heaven or something else happens, then I'll be fine. instead of focusing on, no, I want you to think about your suffering right now.
Yeah, it's like a lot of spiritual, through all my spiritual searching, there was a lot of escapism, you know, like I'm going to go and float into my magic other dimension and leave this body, and like, this is not, you know, important, my experience now, because the afterlife is going to promise me this other thing. And then we end up hating our life and hating, only reaching, like grasping for the joy in life and rejecting the pain, or coming for reasons why we're suffering, because there's some like spiritual solution for that. But the spiritual solution is to understand what's happening right now. Like, in the moment is really where enlightenment happens. It doesn't happen, and it's not a journey down the road. It's here in this moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the first aggregate is the body, because it's kind of the most obvious. And this is interesting, yoga philosophy, right? You have this idea that the physical body is made out of food. It's made out of the stuff that we eat, right? It reconstructs itself continuously to where we have a presence in physical reality because of food. And there is something to that, of course, because we know now from genetics, the body breaks down the food elements, the proteins and fats and carbohydrates, and reconstructs the body continuously so that we're present in this body.
So if you are kind of superficial, or you're self-conscious about your body, it's really just such a very little part of ourselves that's not even, it doesn't last, and it's food. So we get so attached to the body, like what our weight is, how our wrinkles look on our face, look at our hair, you know. Everything's that physical, our strength and our power, you know, in the physical body.
Yeah, and Buddha himself went through this period of negating the body. You might see those statues where he's completely like a skeleton. He's meditating, but he's barely just skin and bones, because he went through this period of, can we just get rid of this body somehow, or enough to get it out of the way so that we can really experience what the essence of our true self is.
And isn't that what yoga, like the asanas in yoga really were designed to do, is like get the body quiet and balanced so you can go to the mind?
Yes, but a very different approach, because there was, and in you see it in the West too, where you have this idea of punishing the body. Of kind of starving it or hitting it directly. In the East, there was also these traditions of not eating,
fasting.
Yeah, but to extremes, not like the fasting for health. But
detox, like
really
the lemon
fasting to deny the body, right, to kind of diminish its presence enough to where you could experience the spiritual. But anyway, he ended up finding the middle path because of that experience.
The middle way.
The middle way, that you don't want to eat too little, but you don't want to go to the other extreme where you're just gorging yourself and escaping through food. So he says the middle path is the way where you're taking care of your body, but you're also
not obsessed about it.
Exactly, it's not driving you. The urges of the body are not driving you. You're in control of it. So this first part of the aggregates, the body, is an important aspect that he considered, that gives us that false sense of the self, that there is a self in us, kind of, that's permanent.
Yeah.
And then he says,
and we all know we die, so
yeah, exactly.
It's like obvious that this body doesn't last.
Yeah, and we know if you dissect the body, there's no ego there to be found. Like there's nothing left over once the body disintegrates. So it's an aggregate. Created out of the elements, right, of the world. The other aggregate is the feeling. excuse me. So the feelings here, you know how in our coaching, in Jungian model, we talk about these imprints that are left from the experiences of early childhood. Here he's talking very much in similar ways. He's saying we feel everything we experience instead of just thinking about it or
witnessing it. There's a feeling connected to it.
There's a sense of that we're present with this environment or this situation or this person, and it gives us a certain feeling, and that's always operating like it's an instinct in us, and it leaves these imprints on us. It kind of, the body learns through the feeling of things of what is reality, right? It's always taking notes in a sense. So,
and we end up living our life reacting to past experience through our feelings. Like our feelings basically are making all the decisions. That kind of like emotional drives of moving away from pain toward pleasure, and we aren't even conscious of it anymore. We're just feeling it out.
Yeah. So these samsaras that are these imprints that are left in the body through, in our mind body through the feeling of things, they play a big role in how we experience the rest of our life. And so if we never look at them, they pretty much give us a template for the rest of our life. And he says, well, this is one of the sources of this false sense of self as well. That now you're going around thinking you're the body, or thinking that the self, that the body is kind of part of the self, and that these feelings are giving you the sense of who you are in the world. The third aggregate is perceptions, of course, through the senses, through eyes, ears, touch, taste, smell. We perceive the world, right? We're constantly perceiving the world, and that gives us a big chunk of, or a big sense of, I exist because I think
I see this, right?
Right, because I perceive something. Therefore, there must be a perceiver, and it must be an I, a me, a self.
So I have this body. I'm feeling this. I'm perceiving this.
Yeah.
And then the will.
Yeah. Then, and here I'm breaking it down more in kind of, again, like students of the mind that we are. We're translating some of these concepts in Buddhist philosophy. The next aggregate is this sense of will, the sense of agency, of being able to do things. So it kind of gives us this feedback that, if I see this object and then I'm able to pick it up, there must be a self in there somewhere.
I can move things. I can move my body. I can talk to people. I can make an influence.
That's right. And it gives us this false sense of I again. It reinforces that sense of I. But if we peel it away and we ask, well, is this volition, the sense of will, really coming from an I?
From my body and my perception.
Right, because if you consider some of the other elements that he's talking about, that the karma, for example, conditioning, is really moving you and compelling you to act.
So you don't, not really, like we talk about, you're never really making these conscious decisions.
Yeah.
Most of us are sleepwalking, and we take the ego takes credit for our decisions. Like, oh, I'm the one who met this soulmate, or I'm the one who made this money, or I'm the one who made this choice and it's so great, and I'm the one even who's helping others. Like I chose to do this, versus it's that karma that actually is creating.
Yeah, We know
removed by the
and
karma.
even in Western psychology, we know conditioning is a very powerful influence on behavior, on all living forms, not only humans. All living forms are conditioned by their environment. And through evolutionary psychology, well, it makes sense because you're meant to survive in the environment that you live in. So if you had to think about everything and learn it
Every day.
cognitively,
Yeah.
you wouldn't survive.
Like, how do I chew my food? How do I tie my shoes? How do I button my shirt?
Yes.
You know, that all day long. But then those things are kind of constructive patterns that we need. But then there's also the destructive ones, which keep us in a pattern of thinking and feeling and reacting that are not pleasant, and we're trapped. But we think we're doing it. Like we, you know, I think one of the main things in this is for everyone is, you know, a lot of times we go do personal development work and then we feel that we did something wrong. We feel guilty about something we did or something we said. And it's almost like, well, if we feel guilty, that means we knew we did it intentionally. And then if you look at other people, their intention is always for joy, like, you know, not to harm others, although it appears that way. It's their karma playing out. And so if you can see that, that will help you not only have compassion for yourself, but for others, because none of us are in control unless we become enlightened. But that's that kind of will, like someone willed harm on me, or someone like our parents, or, you know, ex relationships, they did something wrong, right? And then we feel that way too. I know for me, I've like doing individuation brings up so much regret, because if I would have known my behaviors back then, I would have done better, and we just beat ourselves up. But then that's the trap of the ego. It's like the ego is so arrogant, it thinks it made all those decisions consciously.
Yeah.
But the ego is just reacting. It's kind of like a machine that just keeps us together, keeps us this individual expression of this body, but it's only there for us to survive.
Yeah. And then the final fifth aggregate, sometimes it's translated as consciousness, but if you read the description of how the Buddha was thinking about it, it's more attention. It's what we pay attention to, like where we focus on things. And that gives us a big sense of ourself, a false sense of ourselves, because we start to think that in relation to objects, right? If I pay attention to something, it starts to feel real and solid. My mind is kind of filled with it. It kind of takes over my mind. That attention, that awareness, and the kind of moving of attention, it's kind of hidden in plain sight. Most of us don't think about it, but we're always directing it, or it appears that we're directing it in certain directions, in certain things, but it's illusory. It doesn't really have an eye behind it. It's more a function of the mind in relation to environment and to things.
If we weren't have a conscious self or experience that, we would not be able to perceive or know we have a body or feel. There's some part of us that's conscious of our own experience, individual experience.
Yeah, and of course we're going to get to kind of what is there if there is no ego self. But for these five aggregates, what the Buddha was saying, that's what's giving you this false experience of your I, of your ego, of this false self that you believe yourself to be. And why is it important? Because it is the root of your suffering.
Like we talked about last time.
Yeah, like the Dalai Lama said, the only reason we suffer is because we are over-identified with the ego. We think we are the ego. We think there's this I in me that needs to be happy, that needs to find satisfaction in obtaining things and experiencing things.
And protecting myself and protecting this body.
Yes.
And feeling good, right? We're so attached to, if I want to feel good.
And the source of all happiness in human life is the letting go of that, in thinking of others, in practicing compassion, meaning
dropping
non-self.
the ego.
Non-ego, non-self. So it's an important part of the Buddhist philosophy because it lays the foundation for why we suffer and how we're going to transcend it later on.
And so are we going to get into what impermanence is?
Yeah, so exactly. Impermanence is connected to this because if you think about, okay, if we believe we're the I, the ego, then these objects then should give us happiness.
Like the ice cream I had last night. So good.
It gives you.
It didn't last very long, the happiness.
Yeah, and then it gives you a tummy ache or something, right? Or it keeps you up at night, the sugar or something. So for us to expect these external objects to give us happiness, there must be a belief about the I. In other words, they give rise to each other. So this idea of impermanence starts to break that apart. This idea of the 5 aggregates starts to break the ego apart. So you're kind of working on both sides of the equation. You're starting to question and break apart, is there an ego self, and are these objects going to give me happiness? If they're impermanent, meaning they're always in flux, they're always moving, and this is verifiable. In other words, this is not metaphysics. This is because you can test even in physics. Is this glass always going to be here?
And is it solid? It's not. It's like made of space and molecules that are constantly moving. Like this is like a vibration. It's not actually solid.
Yes. Not only that, my perception of it is continuously changing as well. It's
like when flux. It's full, half full and half empty.
It might give me satisfaction in a little bit, for a little while, when it serves me water or when I use it to drink water. But then once it's empty, it loses that appeal to me.
Well, if you think about it, it's like money. If you think about money, that we have this kind of attachment to the number in our bank account. And as we know, money just keeps, it's a flow. It's not, you storehouse it. I mean, some people have a stockhold of savings and that gives them security, but you still have to spend money. You have to pay for food, pay for a home. It's always flowing. You can't just hang on to it and not spend it. You have to spend it. And so it's that same thing, is that a lot of people, see their joy rise when that account number is high, and then they feel a little terrified when it gets too low. And everyone has that kind of, base that they feel comfortable in. And so there's that whole idea that it's slipping through my fingers. I can't save it. I'm spending too much. And then it's just this money is not even, we don't even touch it anymore. It's a concept and a number on basically a computer screen now, or on our credit card statement. And it's not even real as that we can hold and touch. But we're so attached to it, and then also attached to what it means about us. Like if I have a lot of debt, I'm bad. Or if I have a lot of savings, I'm good. Or if I make this amount of money in my career. So there's that kind of fluctuation that that we all can relate to with money and feelings and perceptions.
Yes. No, so the Buddha wasn't saying you should forget about all this stuff.
Yes.
He's simply saying you can't depend on that for your happiness, for your well-being, because that is what causes suffering right there.
Because we're chasing this carrot. When I find that partner, when I, reach a certain level of my career, when I make a certain amount of money, when I get that new house, that's going to make me happy. And then we get that brand new car that we've been waiting for, and we drive it for a week, and then we're like, I think I want another one, or it's not as great as, it didn't give me the satisfaction that I craved. And it's the ego's, that constant craving of the ego that's never, ever satisfied. And so if we keep pursuing that, we're always suffering.
So if you put that together, you put these 5 aggregates that give us this false sense of I, and then this impermanent nature of things, that's samsara. It's this whole ocean of objects that we're born into of the world that we're experiencing, and we're expecting things to make us happy, but they can't, right? They cause us suffering. Not, again, like we said in the first episode, not so much that we're in pain all the time, but that we're dissatisfied, that we're not comfortable, we're not at ease, we're not peaceful.
You say it's like the pebble in the shoe. It's just, it's not terrible, but it's not, it's, you're just always never, you never feel like relaxed and like life is great. And if when you do, there's like people always say, you're going to be afraid the other shoe's going to drop. I hear that a lot. People can't even enjoy their happipiness when they have it.
That's it.
It's like they're waiting for something now to go wrong again.
Right, and if you notice, when we live from that ego perspective, like we're always preparing for something, but it never comes. Or when it comes, then there's something else that needs to be added or needs to be achieved, and so it just keeps us moving continuously.
It's like that play we saw, Waiting for Godot, where we were these 2 men are waiting for this person to show up, and they're waiting and waiting, and they're meeting all these characters, and why are we meeting him again? Like they don't even know why they're waiting for this, and it's just kind of like a life, or waiting for something to happen, and it's always somewhere in the future. We're always trying to plan. It's great to have visions and what we want to create with our life, but if we're always kind of in the future, one day, we're never here in the moment, and we never will be enjoyed, because we'll get to that milestone, and then there'll be another one. We'll be, okay, I made 100,000, now I want to make 200,000, and it's never ever enough. And that's the ego. And so samsara, would you say that that's where Jung got his idea of the matrix, and when he was talking about archetypes, and how does that tie in?
Yeah, I mean, well, Jung's ideas, you can see the influence of Eastern philosophy, and he followed Schopenhauer, who's a German philosopher who studied a lot of the early translations of the Upanishads directly, and so you see that influence playing out. But of course, Jung was an original thinker, and he was also studying alchemy, Western religious history, so a lot of different influences kind of went into Jung's psychology. But definitely the idea of the matrix, of this appearance of the universe, as a reality for us.
So on an ego level, it's like we're like a mini part of that matrix. And the matrix itself is an extension of these 5 aggregates, because the body of the world, the feeling of the world, our perception of the world is still part of that illusion, or it's illusory. It's a apparent reality, as they say in Vedanta, but it's that samsara, what our perception is fooling us in a way of what's real.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
We're not as solid as we think it is. And
that it's a real experience we're having. Of course, we're experiencing the world, of course.
And ourselves in this body.
Yeah, and ourselves in this body. It's simply that the way we're experiencing it is not the way it appears to us, right? It appears, again, that we're in the body experiencing these external objects, but that's not really what's happening. Through Buddhism, through this inward searching, this inward understanding of what is the mind, what is consciousness, we start to understand that we're creating that reality that we call the universe. It's arising from within us, not an external.
We're not just
reality.
popped in the middle of some solid place that we're
Yes.
trying to survive in.
Yeah. And we'll
separate
talk
from-
more about nirvana and kind of these ideas of meditation and where it's leading us to from Buddhist philosophy or from the Buddhist perspective. But let's talk about emptiness, because
Yeah.
if there is no self, right? If we're empty of a self, and all things, as Buddha said, are empty of this self essence, what does he mean by that? And what are the implications for our everyday life, right? We don't want to just talk about philosophy as these interesting ideas. We want to see, how does it help us understand our life in a direct way? How does it help us become better human beings, better stewards of the planet?
Well, I think a very simple way to look at emptiness is to question our assumptions about what is happening. You know, like a situation or a thing that makes you happy or a thing you want, and understanding it's not empty, like the ice cream. And I like vanilla, you like chocolate. The flavor in itself doesn't have an inherent solid reality. It's our interaction with it that we pour into that, and we create this dynamic between us and the object. But it's actually empty. We're pouring in the feeling. Another example is love. You meet someone and they could be the love of your life. Someone else meets that same person and they're like, yeah, nice guy, but not for me. And it's that person doesn't contain special qualities. They are, the person that perceiving them is actually projecting, like a Jung would say, the animus or anima onto that person, giving them the qualities. And so that person, it's a question that, like, why am I giving this person so much power? Why am I loving this person? Why does that person trigger me? When we talk about shadow work, it's the same thing. It's that reflection. Like, what am I pouring into this situation or this person? And that really leads us back to that emptiness. It's empty of duality, and we're the ones who decide what's good and bad, and it's our interaction with it that creates that spinning of that world that we live in. Because in our world, like my world with you is wonderful and beautiful, but it's emanating from my mind. If it wasn't in here, you can't pour love into me.
Yeah,
you know, like that kind of, like, the things can't put stuff into you. You're putting everything out into the world.
Yeah.
You're the source, basically, and they're what you think is important, what you are attached to. That's what's going to create your reality.
It's a good way to initiate the conversation about emptiness. What is it that we're experiencing, in a sense? So let's go back to pre-Buddhist times, because the Buddha came up in kind of a tradition of Brahmanism, where meditation was very much an important aspect of spiritual work, and the understanding of consciousness was at the heart of that as well. If you read the Upanishads are all about giving us a roadmap as to how does consciousness create this experience of the world, what they call Maya, this illusory, dreamlike experience of the world. So the Buddha, when he experienced that pure consciousness, right? Because all these traditions, you can think of them as a purification of our mind so that we can experience the essence of it. When he experienced that pure consciousness in himself, when he sat under the tree and said, I'm not getting up until I get it, what he experienced was not empty in the way we think of nothingness, that there's nothing there.
I know a lot of people confuse that emptiness and suffering, those concepts.
Yeah, that interpretation, of course, comes from reading this from a materialistic perspective, that we think only objects are reality. Only objects, like if only things that are solid to me, I consider to be real. Anything else is unreal. That's a misinterpretation of this whole Buddhist philosophy. He came up in this understanding of consciousness as forming the universe. In other words, the universe arises within consciousness, not the other way around. So what he meant by emptiness was very similar to what is explained in the Upanishads, that pure consciousness is beyond thought. In other
Beyond
words,
the body.
beyond any conception. You cannot conceive of it the way you think of a glass or a tree or even an idea or a feeling, because anytime you have a name and form, you're already outside the scope of that pure awareness.
You're making it, you're distorting it, what it is.
Yes, you're already in the multiplicity of universal appearance of things. Therefore, a really good way to describe that pure consciousness is emptiness. That there is no object there. There's no thought. It's like the purity of this space where things appear, where the object appears. So if you take away the object, the space is still there. That's what he was talking about. That it's empty of objects, of ideas. You cannot reach it through conceptualizing. In other words, you'll never figure it out. You have to go there directly.
Well, it's almost like, I mean, it's really hard to conceptualize, but the way I found it easy to think about is if you look at this room, what we tend to do is focus on the objects in the room. We don't focus on the space and we know there's something here because there's oxygen and all this other stuff that we can't perceive directly with the naked eye, but we know that there's a space that is holding all these objects in this room, and so if we think about the world as like that, there's this emptiness, and then the objects are in it and kind of covering it. So there's this space is actually in me. Biologically, there's space in me, but you can't see it because my body's covering it. So it's permeating everything. So that's the consciousness that I couldn't live if there wasn't space within me in that space. So it's not exactly the same thing, but it's a way for us to kind of conceptualize in a metaphorical way what we're really experiencing. And so if we take all the objects out of a room, it's sort of like we just moved and we had a home and we had objects in it. And then when we moved out, we walked around and make sure everything was taken away and it was empty. And it was just weird. It wasn't our home anymore because our objects weren't there. And so it was just this empty space. And so it's interesting how we give meaning to things when we have space and objects and memories and people. It has a certain it creates its own story and kind of samsara, basically, of this is my life. We drive past our childhood home, maybe growing up, and there were so many memories in there, but it's not there anymore. There's other people living there, and it's like nothing lasts. But the idea is still there. The memory is still there. And
and this has relevance for East-West psychology, because in the West, we're very focused on the objects.
Yes.
We're thinking the answer has to be in the object.
We're acquiring more, right?
Yeah, if we understand the object and we break it down into its fundamentals, reductionism is at the heart of that we break it down to its cells, into its atoms, and the atoms into smaller quarks and quantum fields, whatever. We're going to find the answer in the object. And the Buddha is saying, you're not going to find it there. That's that's the beginning of that idea of samsara, of finding satisfaction, knowledge in objects.
So is it sort of like Western psychology where they examine the object of the ego and its past experiences?
Yeah.
And trying to tear apart like the childhood reactions and the things, terrible things that happen, and the good things, and the good and bad parents, and all those ideas are basically examining the wrong thing, because you're examining something that is not even as, like when you said to me once, the person your parent was no longer exists.
Exactly.
Like who they were when you were a child, that person no longer exists. It was such a powerful idea. I never heard that before when you said that. And that's kind of like that idea that we hang on to so much of the past that causes our suffering. We identify that this happened to me. I have these scars from my early life, and I have to like heal them. And then they actually in this philosophy no longer exist, but our ego hangs on to them, and that's what causes the suffering.
Yes, and what he's saying is that the freedom, the true kind of the true happiness, the true joy and peacefulness that is our true nature, is to be found in the emptiness, meaning in pure awareness, pure consciousness.
Not making the right wrong or the wrong right. Like we can chase it. Like it was like I call it rearranging the furniture in samsara. We're trying to make this ego better and, fix the past so we can be better and achieve more. And then it turns out we're kind of rearranging and we're just getting more attached to other things. And then whatever we reject has power over us. So if we have regrets of past experiences, our own, it's like a weight. We're kind of carrying that with us, and we're not free.
Yeah, one of the best metaphors I can think of how this object and this empty awareness plays out in right in front of us, and we miss it, is it's kind of a thought experiment. So if you think about empty space.
I love thought experiments.
The vacuum of empty space, right? This beautiful vacuum where there's no air, molecules, nothing to obstruct light. So if you shine a flashlight in that empty space, you won't see the light emanating beyond the flashlight until it hits an object. Then you see the light.
Mm-hmm.
So in between the flashlight and the object, it seems to be empty.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing, but the light is traveling through there, but you don't see it until the object is illuminated. So our awareness, our pure consciousness is very similar. We don't experience it until there's an object, and we think, oh, the object is what I'm conscious of, or what is awareness. But the pure awareness is already there before the object.
I think you at one of our retreats you said that the ego is the object too. So we have an object that's an ego that's interacting with other objects.
Yeah.
But what's beyond that is the emptiness, the pure awareness.
Yes.
And so we're just experiencing ourselves as an ego, but it's not. It's because we think our ego's real that we have an experience of ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, this metaphor goes back to this idea that we're trying to find happiness in the wrong place. We're thinking that the object is more real than our awareness of it. And it's the other way around. Our awareness is the foundation of the appearance of all things for us. Well,
I think for, another thought experiment, what do you think of this idea, is for me, when I go from, when I'm really attached to something, like I want something to happen and it's causing me suffering, I'm like, okay, I'm attached. And I let go of what if it never happens? Like, what if I just let that go, that attachment go? There is this kind of space where I'm not like not willing it to not happen, but I'm not attached to it either, that opens up. And it's like I could be and then naturally joy arises from that place of when I just drop the attachment, the joy just arises. And then that thing doesn't have that power it used to have. And then I could still go toward it, but it's not the source of my happiness. It's like I'm bringing happiness with me versus trying to attain it out there.
Yeah, that's it. And so here, because often people ask us, give me something practical. When what they mean is something that they can apply directly in their life that's going to give them results. What can be more practical than clarifying what is real and what is unreal? If you're misperceiving the world and you're chasing after things that are not going to give you results, that's very impractical. That's very so. Even if somebody is giving you instructions on how to be happier with objects, or how to make your persona better, or how to make your ego better, people would consider that practical. But it's very impractical because it's driving you deeper into the illusion that you are these physical things, that you are the ego, the persona, the personality, and that these objects are going to make you happier. So
which is the root of suffering.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very impractical. It's going to drive you deeper into illusion, into suffering. So these ideas, although they might be a little difficult to grasp because we're conditioned to think of objects as real
and ourselves as real.
Yes. And maybe even our thoughts as less real than the objects.
Oh yeah, we think that everything's solid, and our thoughts are just random. Just conversations we're having with ourselves.
Yes.
So the 5 aggregates, all the 5 represent the ego.
Yeah, they're things that if you start to break apart, what is this experience of the self? You see that these things do not hold the self at all. There is no self behind that. There is no ego self behind the body, behind the feeling, the perception, the will, and the attention that we experience.
So the only thing that's real is pure awareness.
That's it. It's the ultimate reality. What the Buddha called this emptiness is the essence of things. So if you ask, what is the essence of this computer and this table and these microphones? They're empty, meaning they're arising from the pure awareness, from the pure consciousness.
So what about the individual, like an individual experience of consciousness? Is there one beyond the ego?
What do you mean?
Like the soul's, like a soul, or...
Yeah, that's a good...
deeper question. So if you take away the ego, and there's this pure awareness, but we also have an individual, personal experience of being in the world and then not in the world. And what would the Buddhists call that? They don't believe that there's anything else. There's just emptiness.
Yeah, again, we have to distinguish the religion from the philosophy. So,
because we have an individual experience of being aware that we're aware. Or so maybe that's an illusion, that it's an individual experience.
Exactly.
Okay.
The philosophy of Buddhism would say that ego experience that you're having, it's an illusion because it doesn't really exist the way you're thinking it exists. It doesn't mean it's not existing or it's not real. It simply doesn't exist the way you conceive of yourself as an individual.
So back to the conversation of the no self, and then there's the individual ego, which is not solid or real, but we need an object to base it on. So what we're really experiencing when we become enlightened is that pure, like big self, like the oneness. But it appears to us as a separate experience, but it's because we're seeing it through the filter of our five senses. So this idea that we have an individual soul is basically an illusion.
Yeah, the Upanishads explain it in a simpler way.
Okay.
It says the Atman, which is the kind
it's identical.
It would be the soul in you, is identical to Brahman, to the universal spirit or
because of the
consciousness.
object and awareness connecting here on this level, it gives the illusion of individuality.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like the sun shining in the jars and the reflection of the water in the different jars. But it's really the sun is here.
Yeah.
Very deep conversation. So there was a question, the difference between the consciousness and the pure consciousness is that there is no difference. It's just, it appears to be different through the lens of the ego.
Yeah, there you...
Because we have a body, it feels
the
separate.
metaphor of a dream comes in a little more handy here.
Okay.
So if you think about a dream, the dream you had last night, in that dream, you were experiencing yourself doing something. In other words, interacting with objects and other people. Pretty much very similar to this experience. As soon as you wake up, you realize the nature of that experience, meaning it's illusory. Now, did you experience it? Yes, the experience is there. Absolutely. You were fearful, you were happy, you were interacting with objects and people and things. That experience is not diminished. It's simply that its nature, as soon as you wake up, you realize was illusory, dreamlike. This waking experience is very similar. When we realize its nature through this understanding of its emptiness, of its consciousness, we realize its true nature, that it's kind of constructed from these aggregates, from us identifying with these aggregates of the body and the sensation and the
perception,
and the will.
Yeah.
And it appears to us like in a dream that we're experiencing something real, something solid, something that's out there. But as soon as we realize its nature, it's like waking up. You realize, oh, it was an illusion. It was constructed out of thought, out of these aggregates.
And the aggregates create those patterns like we talk about, our psychological patterns, our shadow, and all the archetypes are in that kind of system of the matrix of what makes up the world because of the human consciousness. And then a lot of people would think, well, this is kind of depressing that things aren't as good as I think they are, and I want to hope. But in actuality, it's more freeing to let go of the attachment. Because once you realize that you're the one who puts the joy in things, you can control your joy. You are in control of everything in life. You're not depending on an object out there to show up or not show up for you to feel joy. That it's completely inside of you, and that to me is liberating. Because you can be in the. I always talk about that eye of the storm. You know, the world has a lot of stuff going on. People are scared and good things are happening, bad things are happening, depending on who you are. And you're in that kind of swirling of the world, but you can stay in that eye, the center, which is pure bliss. And that's really the key, is that you can be in the world and be in the aggregates in the body and have this experience, but at the same time be awake in it, where it doesn't destroy you or you suffer your whole life through it. And so that's Buddha's gift, is to how to be in this moment now, in this life, in this body, but be free at the same time.
Very much so. So in the metaphor of the dream, it would be like lucid dreaming, where you're able then to direct the dream and to be conscious in the dream instead of being caught up in it.
Yeah, a reaction. Yeah.
Yes.
So someone was saying, would letting go of the persona be the first step? Yeah, actually, I think shadow work in Jungian psychology is a really great way to break apart these aggregates, because the shadow is basically built on these aggregates of past experience and what's good, what's bad, and the attachment to the ego, persona. And what we're doing with shadow work is we're seeing both sides of ourselves in the ego, that we're not good, we're not bad, we're both. And that neutralizes kind of our attachment. And then we start to see ourselves in other people. And then we start to see the matrix, actually. We start to get a glimpse of the matrix first in shadow work. A lot of people think shadow work is about like all your negative stuff, getting it out of the way. But actually, shadow work is about reclaiming all of who you are, becoming whole again to all aspects of yourself, not the parts that reclaiming those parts that we repressed. And for me, it's a direct experience, a very simple way for people to get this bigger concept. And then as you go beyond shadow work, then of course there's working with the archetypes, the masculine, feminine archetypes, the anima, animus, and all the other beautiful Jungian philosophies and dream work and all those experiences that we can have in that Western psychology mixed with this beautiful, brilliant idea of emptiness.
Absolutely.
And make it more happy and make it more a joyful life. I mean, we're here to create and like there's a reason why we have this false, this samsara exists, but when we're in samsara, we forget that we're in. Is that the concept? That we're suffering?
Oh, absolutely.
It's caught
up.
Yeah, when you get caught up in it.
Yeah. And again, we're conditioned. You could think of karma and samskara as that conditioning power. It compels us to act. We're not really acting in a free, conscious way. We're acting out our karma, our conditioning, our past. And the objective is simply to be free, right? The reason we study the mind is we want to be free. We want to be conscious so that we can then make real conscious choices and decisions about how we show up in the world, how we interact with others, instead of being in that
defensiveness.
Yeah, and the projection, like you're saying, of the shadow, that we're projecting our own assumptions onto others and making them good or bad, and misunderstanding the whole thing. That's the main thing. Is
the
that
delusion.
We're in a delusional experience when we're caught up in that. That samsara.
The first aspect of shadow work I worked on was relationships, and I was saying all these men, they don't want a commitment. And when I realized that was me, that I was projecting onto these people, it was like I got the key to myself again, like the key to that power, that, I'm the one. And I was like thinking, for 20 years, I've been suffering, and I've been the one who was creating it. And I'm thinking these bad men out there are the ones hurting me, and they're terrible men. But I was the one who was creating my own suffering. And at first I was mad at myself and then I was free, because I think it's really hard. The ego does not want you to take responsibility for it. It will resist that you are the cause. It will want to project it out there, want to make the world more powerful than it, it's a trick. And when you wake up, and of course it's not just one realization. It's a lifetime of remembering and falling back into samsara, getting caught up, because our conditioning is so powerful, and waking ourselves up again until we can really fully kind of learn how to balance the mind. Yeah.
So again, we're talking about the philosophy. If you have a religious practice in Buddhism, please excuse our philosophizing about it, because it is a different perspective that we're taking, right? We're approaching it as or looking at the philosophical aspects of Buddhism, and you see there it's a kind of psychology, right? Buddha was very much a psychologist, And then he was thinking about what is our individual experience of this? Why is it that we suffer when we experience the world?
He talks a lot about emotion, teaching feelings, and where in Vedanta they don't really talk about emotions as much as in Buddhism. So feel close, kind of a bridge to a little psychology.
Yeah, it's more contemporary in that sense.
Yeah. But wow, we went a long time today. This was such a deep conversation, and hope your minds aren't too blown, but feel free to listen again. And if you're listening to the replay, please feel free to comment and ask us questions. We'd love to hear from you. And we will be continuing next week, where we're going to talk about compassion and how to really embrace the world in a different way. We definitely needed, I told Rob we should have done it this week, but how to bring enlightenment in the world. How do we enlighten the world? How to make the world more awake? How can we be a part of that?
Yeah, in that regard, Buddhism has a lot to offer to the West and to the world in general, because it has the potential. It's very applicable in today's context, that we need to start thinking in a cosmic or at least a global sense. What are we doing to the planet through our misunderstanding of it, through this illusory misperception of things, where we're really escalating the level of suffering, not only for ourselves, but for all sentient living things, and therefore we need to desperately wake up.
And the last question, it's not a belief that I was seeing a confirmation bias about not being like men don't like commitment. I was the one who didn't like commitment. So it was a projection of the shadow. So shadow work is a little different than belief work. It's more about what we're seeing in the world is actually, or what we judge about others is actually about ourselves. So I was the one who didn't want a commitment, but that's what was creating the suffering, because I didn't realize it was me, and I kept projecting it out. Those people out there didn't want commitment, and I was the one. And then I realized that I could make a decision. I do want a commitment now, and figure out what was the fear around commitment, and that's what set me free. So, great question. All right, have a great week, everyone. We'll see you next Friday for our next soul sessions. And we hope you enjoyed today, and we really, really love the work we're doing today. And I'm trying to get our end note, but it's not working, so I'm mumbling a little bit.
Oh, well, thanks for watching.
Yes.
We appreciate it. All the great comments and questions. We'll see you next time.
Yes, take care. Bye-bye.